Rong sẽ giải tỏ ý trọng nhẹ chỉ cái tin trà thiên trọngผู้หญิงมอชัวซุนสุตุที่เราใช้ต่อชั่วโมงกูอยากเรียกบอกเลยว่านุ่งน้อยอยากรู้ก่อนหินตุนหุ่นตีกบเราช่องเช่นหนึ่งก่อยอดตัวเรากูจะเป็นมาใช้ต่อเกชิตาเราโดยถูกกุลีช่อยอดตัวที่อเมริกาถูกกุลีช่อน้ำมันลุ่มเบหัวเดีย Frank Herman จึงตัดต่อฟงที่อเมริกาสุดกินในต่อไอเดียยาตาหล่อที่อเมริกาตัวมุกกงเกจอลูยอดตัวที่หล่อจัวยอดตัวช่องอีเซียจุบปชาจุเป้ต่อการโดยที่อเมริกาชิดต่อการสุดกินนอเลยโอโดจะชื่อจอที่หล่อจัวยอดตัวรู้ใจนอตัวชีเตเจียพอวัวจงเฟอเมริกาตัวจอเชยอดตัวต่อการมูจีจอที่จีกุนชอตัวอีเฟิงเดี๋ยวจะมองว่าตรงกับหาจงหาช่วยยาตาหล่อแล้วสุดนี้นู่นนอย่าลืมตัวรู้ใจนอเนี่ยที่ตัวฟงที่อเมริกาสุดกินนอเมื่อชาติแต่โดยจอเนี่ยสิกตินิจาที่จะพุ่งยิวในจีเป้าลอยอเมริกาจงเกชิตาเนี่ยตัวน้อยอยู่ท่าอวลอยอเมริกาซื้อยังในจีเป้าจงก็จะเส้นเจ้าเจเลยอยากจะเป้าลอยอเมริกาป้าท้าสายตัวแน่อย่าลืมส่วนสิ่งเรากูจะไปหมดใช้จอเกชิตาตัว Herman Frank Hi Frank First of all can you tell us about the case that you are handling right now
Hello, my name is Herman Frank. I'm an attorney here in Sacramento, California. For quite a while, I have been doing law cases on behalf of the Hmong people concerning the atrocities of Laos. As I'm sure many of you know, after the 1973 ceasefire peace agreement, the concept was that United States promised to take care of the Hmong people. They made this promise because they had asked the Hmong people to assist them in their war against the Viet Cong. There's part of the Ho Chi Minh Trail that led into Laos, and there was a good strategy of interrupting that supply line. And the Hmong people quickly agreed and were happy to fight for us. But on the back end, we made an agreement as a government that we promised to take care of the Hmong. Unfortunately, USA violated that promise. The case we have right now is currently in the United States Supreme Court. It's basically about breach of promise. And if this were ever to be a book, I'd call it The Promise. And it's really about breach of promise. The USA promised, risk your lives for us. We know if the war goes against us, you will probably be slaughtered. So we will have you, don't worry, we're going to protect you from that. And we promised to do that. Well, what happened was there were a lot of people that did get protected. So the promise was not entirely not lived up to. Many people, as I'm sure you know, got over to Thailand. They became refugees there. They were then able to come to USA on a refugee visa. And as a result, guess what? We have Hmong people all over Sacramento area, up and down Fresno, a very prosperous group. They got all kinds of stuff going on, owners of small businesses, working for the state of California. That's what goes on here in Sacramento. There's a whole other group of Hmong people in USA that went to Minnesota. And I don't know why you guys went there. It's so cold, but whatever. There's some other people in Oklahoma. There are people in Missouri. So I'm learning Hmong are just like everywhere now. But many of them never got over here. Many of them stayed. And the problem was, when we left, we also left all our weapons there, some really good weapons, weapons by the CIA, which were kind of like top grade. CIA, our Central Intelligence Agency, gets our best weapons. And they are cut above like a normal soldier's weapons. When we left all this stuff there. There are major rifle systems, also airplane systems with poisons in barrels. And later, when the communists took over Laos, after we left, they picked up all that weaponry and they used it to hunt down the Hmong people. There was an edict written by one of the top generals that it was like an official policy to kill the Hmong, to wipe them out, and he used the phrase down to their root, which means, kill their seed. It's like you not only kill the soldier, but his kid, his grandkid, and every kid around. The old people were taking pills to die. The young people, the young girls were getting raped. The young boys were being sexually mutilated, their penises cut off. They have stories of eviscerations where they basically just cut your guts and they fall out. I've heard stories of people being wrapped around trees, their eyes cut out, just terrible stuff. And all of this would have been avoided had the USA lived up to its promise, basically, and got them all out of there. The only way to survive it was they had to go. The Laos Communist military, when they took over after the peace treaty, was highly organized, highly regimented, highly armed, and also now had airplanes with poisons that we had brought over there, and they were dumping those poisons into the forest, destroying the ecosystem where the Hmong had gone into hiding on. There's some amazing proof of this. Sometimes when I tell this story, people listen to me and they say, it sounds like outrageously fantastic, unbelievable, but there's actually a documentary done on it. It's called Hunted Like Animals, and it's the best title because it's exactly what it was. And at the beginning of it, the Hmong people, there is shown on it, Hmong people made drawings from bark of the soldiers out there gunning them down, shooting them down, raping them, torturing them. The whole story is actually done in the form of Hmong original art. It's quite harrowing. Well, we did this case, and it is currently in the United States Supreme Court. I brought this today, is it's called Petition for Writ of Certiorari, which is a kind of a complicated Latin way of saying writ of review. It's me asking the court to please review our case. Unfortunately, the trial court dismissed it, and the Court of Appeals dismissed it. Now, what our case alleges, it requests compensatory damages, class action status, declaratory relief, and injunctive relief. Injunction is when the court orders somebody to do something. The injunction we want is what's called specific performance of the treaty and agreement whereby the USA agreed to protect and safeguard the Hmong people from Laotian government. So there is an agreement that we agreed to do, and there are still people there right now in the jungles of Laos that need protection. So this is not a done story yet. Unfortunately, this story still continues. We want damages for all the many people who have lost their lives. The amounts would be, I don't even know, but it would be a very large amount. The complaint describes the following from the video, Hunted Like Animals. There's a part of it that shows the King of Laos at the White House making this promise with then, actually goes back to President Eisenhower, and it goes back to President John F. Kennedy. The basic deal was the King of Laos would authorize and order the King of the Hmong people in Laos to order his people to become our soldiers. We would pay them. They would be USA soldiers wearing USA soldier uniforms and paid through the CIA, all done, of course, in a way authorized by the U.S. government and agreed to by the U.S. government. Our claim, when we said that we should have a lawsuit about this for breach of agreement and breach of promise, the trial court and the Court of Appeals disagreed and said there was no such case. What they ruled was that there's a Supreme Court rule made called non-justiciability. It's kind of a long word, not my word, but it's the word of this rule that says certain political questions cannot be brought to court. Let me read to you what the Court of Appeals said. This is United States Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, San Francisco, March 30, 2020, in this case. The district court correctly determined that plaintiffs' claims present non-justiciable political questions. Plaintiff's lawsuit would require the court to pass judgment on United States foreign policy in Southeast Asia for a period spanning several decades. It is well established that the conduct of foreign relations is committed by the Constitution to the political departments of the federal government, and that the propriety of the exercise of that power is not open to judicial review. In addition, whether to grant military or other aid to the Hmong is a political decision inherently entangled with the conduct of foreign relations. So what the court is saying there is this is a political question, we're not going to intervene, you lose. And they basically didn't allow us our day in court. So all these claims that I'm telling you about never saw the merits, that never saw the light of day. Instead, the trial court and the Court of Appeals imposed this political question doctrine to basically bar the case and not allow it at all. So we sought review by the Supreme Court. We think this is an extremely important issue. They don't actually take that many cases. They get many requests. Few of them are granted. We are hoping this is the kind of request that ought to be granted. We have asked them to consider the following arguments in support of review. I should say that also it's on docket October 16, 2020. Today we're just like right before that, and of course we don't know the outcome yet. But it's on for it's docketed for that date on the issue of whether they will hear it at all. If they will hear the case, then we'll be briefing it some more. What I'm holding in my hand right now is the brief we filed. Review is warranted to resolve an important federal question of whether the court should establish a breach of promise exception to the non-justiciable political question rule. In this argument, I try to convince the court that if we make a promise to another people, we have to be held up to that promise. We can't just say, well, you know what, that's a political question, sorry. It's like, no. If you made a promise, you got to live up to the promise. One of the things that's happened since this case came out, recently the Supreme Court issued a new big decision in Native American law in which the justices said we hold the USA to its promises. And I'm citing that case here, hoping that they will hold the USA to its promises. It's really what this case is breach of promise. The second issue we present is review is warranted because this case presents an important federal question of whether the court should establish a breach of treaty exception to the non-justiciable political question rule. In this claim, we state that the agreement between our President John F. Kennedy, our President Eisenhower, and the King of Laos and the King of Hmong is in the category of a treaty. And treaties under our U.S. Constitution are what's called the supreme law of the land under the Supremacy Clause. There is case law saying you may sue as a third-party beneficiary of a treaty right. So it would allow a private party the right to sue for breach of treaty. There's published case law saying that. The court here said no to that, so we're hoping they challenge whether we had a treaty, and I'm thinking if it's done by a president to a king, that's a treaty. Anyway, that's our second argument. The third argument and final argument that we urge upon the U.S. Supreme Court, and if the U.S. Supreme Court should do this, it would be kind of a big decision. It would be one of those that everyone would say, wow, about. Review is warranted because this case presents an important federal question of whether the court should establish a war crimes exception to the non-justiciable political question rule. What this means is this: the USA was complicit in the creation of a whole bunch of war crimes committed by the Laos communist government. Basically, we brought all the weapons. They're all of our guns, all of our munitions, all of our poisons, our airplanes, our communication system. We just left them there without any protection. It's not a question of just not protecting somebody. It's a problem of bringing the weapons down that were used to slaughter them. Something like over 300,000 Hmong people were killed in these jungles in this process. So the numbers are genocidal. And we state that genocides and war crimes are always committed at high levels, and they're always going to be subject to what's called a political question. In other words, we compare it to the Nazis, where they had to decide to commit a genocide against the Jews. Those were not a couple renegade Nazis. That was official Nazi policy, and that's the same thing it was in Laos. The official communist policy, which was written into like a decree, was to slaughter the Hmong, for sure, down to the root. It means, as I said earlier, not just the soldier, his whole family, his grandparents, his kids, his grandkids, anybody related to him, anybody married to him, they would be killed and they would be hunted down like animals, shot, raped, tortured, cut up, eviscerated, you name it, they did it. We request that the court agree that, of course, these are done by high-level executive branch decisions. In our case, by the CIA. They're the ones that pulled out of there. That's part of our executive branch. And in Laos, it's their new communist government. So you have two governments doing something against the Hmong people. In a prior case, we sued the Laos government. The court would not allow that. We sued here as well. We brought that to the U.S. Supreme Court. The answer was no. We have now brought this second case against USA. It is set before the U.S. Supreme Court. We hope it works. I would like you to know, again, my name is Herman Frank. I'm a lawyer here in Sacramento, California. I would like you to know I hired on to these cases long ago, and I have not been, I'm doing this not for pay. And I don't mean to complain about it, but I just don't want any of the Hmong people out there to have this bad idea that I've convinced someone to give me a whole lot of money to do this case. There are people who have helped me. I won't name them now because they requested to be anonymous, but I can tell you that this booklet costs about $3,500 to print. And there were some Hmong people that came forward here in the Sacramento area and in the Minnesota area to give me the money to print this up. There was a filing fee with all these courts, $800 Court of Appeals, $300 U.S. Supreme Court. There were monies that were given to me by Hmong supporting community. I thank all of them. I acknowledge them anonymously because they requested that. You will hear soon about the Supreme Court ruling. It'll be coming out approximately October 16. Pray for us. Thank you for listening.
What about the first case that you sued the government of Laos? What happened to that case? Can you explain to us or give us an update on that case?
The first case was before the Laotian government and government officials. It was filed under an Alien Tort Claims Act, a U.S. federal law, that allows people who are victims of faraway disasters that violate treaties can sue here if there's a connection to USA. So we attempted to allege that there was that connection through the CIA's involvement and the USA's involvement. The trial court disagreed and dismissed our case. We appealed that to the Court of Appeals. They affirmed, which means they agree with the trial court, and dismissed it, basically saying there's no connection to USA. What the communists did over there, they did over there, and you can't sue here for what happened over there. To make a long story short, we then petitioned for review to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said no review, and that was the end of that. When the court denies review, the only word you hear is petition denied. It doesn't give an opinion, but it just means, we don't, they might be, I don't want to really speculate, but one thing is, we think what happened was proper, so they don't disagree with what happened. I think normally when they take a case, they take it because they think there was an error, and they may not think there's an error.
Can you explain to us more on how the judge dismissed the first case that you sued the government of Laos?
The judge makes the determination based on law in a motion that is filed, in this case, by the U.S. Attorney's Office. It was a motion to dismiss based on subject matter jurisdiction and based on a procedure called failure to state a claim. In that, this is just a rule of federal procedure that we allow such a motion to dismiss a case. In that motion, they argued this is barred by the political question doctrine. The trial court agreed with that and granted the motion and dismissed it. The Court of Appeals heard the same basic arguments and decided in the same way. That's how that happens.
So Frank, what is different between this case and the first case?
The main difference is a different defendant. The first one was against Laos and the government of Laos. This one is against USA. But otherwise, it's the same situation. What happened to the Hmong people after the ceasefire and the peace treaty, when everyone left, and so many were left there and slaughtered. So that whole piece of the case is the same in both. The added feature to this one is the promise that was violated, because ultimately it's a breach of promise case.
Let's go back to the peace treaty in Laos in 1973. Did the United States sign the peace treaty?
I did not. I heard that it was signed, and I talked to a couple. In my investigations, I actually was able to meet some members of the assembly, of the Royal Assembly, including Elizabeth, I'm sorry, I forgot her last name, and she was a direct witness to it. And the way she described it, Henry Kissinger went in there and demanded that they sign it under the threat. I remember the way she described this to me was, if you don't sign this, we're just going to leave, and there will be, we're just going to take off and good luck. And so they signed it. So I heard it was signed. I have to say, now that you've said that, I'm going to go look that up to make sure of it, because I have copies of that treaty, and I think everybody signed it.
You mentioned about the current case. We'll have a hearing coming up on October 16, 2020. Can you give us more detail on that?
The 16th, it's going to be a conference in the Supreme Court, but I won't be there. It'll just be the justices, not me. I'm not there. We're not there at all. We just stay home and wait to the result. And we'll probably get it that day or the next day. One of the things I learned about the U.S. Supreme Court, when they go fast. They move fast. If review is denied, so if I get this one-page document, it says petition denied, that means the case is over. There's no further place to go. We're done. If review is granted, they will then make a scheduling order requiring me to file a further brief and letting the USA file a brief, and then we get a reply brief, and then they'll set it for hearing, and then we'll have a hearing, and then they'll decide it. If they were to reverse and say, we reverse the trial court and the Court of Appeals in order that this case be heard on the merits, then we would go to trial in the trial court, and we'd have a case which would be obviously very good. I'm sure if this ever got to trial, we would win, because the promise is clear. We have great evidence of the promise. We have great evidence on everything. So we're having a problem with the law. I'd like to point out that law was not made by our Congress. It's a judge-made law. It was made by the Supreme Court. And so I'm going to the very source, like, you guys made this law, I need you to make some exceptions on it. And there's a good shot that they can do that. So we'll see.
Frank, thank you for your time. 一种呢，这个定价贴种不毛出存出度，可能报答了呢，要给西塔叫做 Frank Herman。Frank Herman 有一度举例超，有度在加美加，你正打到风在加美加，做到几你到一点，ยาตลอด在加美加ตัวมุกงเกจอลู有度在加落做โดยชงอีเสียจุปชาจุเป้เดี๋ยวจะชื่อจ่อ在加落做ยาตลอดที่จะชื่อจ่อ在加落做有度รู้ใจนอต่อการเดี๋ยว在加美加จิตต่อการ做到几นอเลยโอดูจะชื่อจ่อ在加落做有度รู้ใจนอตัวสีได้เจียพอ我政府อเมริกาตัวจอเจตกาหมู่จีจอกุนชอตัวอีเฟิงเดี๋ยวจะมองว่าตรงกับหาจงหาช่วยยาตาหล่อเราจะโดนนู่นนออย่างลิงหนึ่งเทตัวฟงเตเชออเมริกาจะโดนกินนอจงปล้องทุนนอจิโป้เดี๋ยวตอนเด่นนอยจงลิจาโดลิจายังมุดได้จินซีมาลิชัตเตอร์จะตัวปูตัวอีจงเนี่ยสีก็ตินจาเดี๋ยวจะพุ่งสุดเดือดตัวป้อนสีกูมองรู้เชื่อนะเราว่าจงนั้นดาวตัวในช่วงนึงสุดตัวที่เราไม่ใช้จะช่วยมองเนี่ยตัวจงนอทอกันในช่วงสุดตัวจนชีเกณฑ์นักการยาจงกูอยากรู้จักว่าได้มาชิจิดี